Hello, everybody. I think I've seen a lot of familiar faces here, so appreciate you all joining here. Yeah, so just quickly, Altimetric is a digital transformation company headquartered in Southfield, Michigan, with a global presence. So basically helping companies stay ahead of the curve with technology change and source innovation from their teams, kind of at the highest level. And Ryan Robinson, who I'm going to point every direction because I don't know where she is on your guys' screens. Ryan and I work on the Collider team, which is the community-facing branch of the larger Altimetric team, where we are building a hub for software engineers, specifically concentrated in Metro Detroit region. But now that we are 100% virtual for the time being, I suppose that folks could be based anywhere. But we are regularly partnering with awesome event organizers like the Detroit Tech Watch team here to provide you with awesome, relevant programs and entertainment that speak to helping software engineers connect and grow in this region. So we'll drop a link in the chat here if you're interested in learning more. Please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we are specifically hiring for React and Angular developers right now. So if you know anybody or if you yourself are looking for that type of opportunity, please do let us know. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to the Detroit Tech Watch guys. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thanks for that. And so tonight our speaker is Bruce Tate. Thanks for joining us, Bruce. And Bruce is going to be talking about Phoenix LiveView, Elixir and Phoenix LiveView. And it sounds pretty exciting from the little preview or discussion we had beforehand. So I'll let you take it away, Bruce. Thank you.
All right. And what kind of time do we have?
We have at least 1 hour for you. So most people don't need that much, but some people want all that plus more, and you could probably go further if you needed to.
We'll see how it goes. So basically, I am here in support of Groxio. That's my new company. It's grox.io, and Grok is kind of means to intuitively understand something. And if you look at our logo really closely, the I and the O are written as a 1 and a 0. So Grox.io is like understands computer languages. And it's 1 character longer than a URL shortener, right? So we have a couple of things happening. At the end of the month, we have a live view where we have an OTP class at the end of this month and a live view class at the end of next month. So the end of this month so beginning July, let me get the date right here, July 22nd through 24th, we have the intermediate Elixir with OTP. And at the end of August 26th through 28th, we have a live view class. And during this pandemic, what we've been doing is offering our normal classes, but rather than doing them in person, we're doing them remotely. And the other thing that we're doing is we're having very small classes. So we're capping the cost so to keep things affordable for folks. And we are, so it's about half of what we charge a normal training. And we're keeping, we're taking 5 paid clients, and we offer 1 scholarship client from someone underrepresented in tech, as long as, as long as these protests are coming on, just to kind of give a hat tip to that. We make a community that we'd all be proud of. So let's talk live view a little bit. So I see that, so if you open your participants tab, and by the way, a host should open their participant tab too. On the bottom, you see a couple of votes. How many people have used live view or seen live view? Click yes or no. All right, that looks pretty good. So just over half are new to LiveView. Okay, can we clear that much? One of the hosts? And how many people have used Elixir before or seen Elixir before? About the same mix. A few more people have used Elixir. Okay, so I'll try to to talk about what we're doing along the way. Essentially, all the concepts that we're going to talk about tonight are basically applicable to general purpose programming. In fact, I have a couple of mentoring programs. One's happening in Kenya, one's in Chattanooga. And so the rules, if you want to join the Chattanooga meetup, the rules are be someone underrepresented in tech or bring someone underrepresented in tech. And we meet every Thursday at 6 o'clock. It's a Zoom link, and you can ping us. You can ping us at Groxio Learning, Groxio Learning on Twitter, and we'll get you that link if you're interested. But what we found is that when we're trying to build opportunities, job opportunities for developers, we do better off teaching people Elixir or a higher level programming language because we feel that we build better developers that way. And our graduates, or the people who have joined the program and gotten jobs, are working in all different languages. Only 2 in Elixir. One's at Google doing DevOps, one's at Metatrack doing Ruby testing. Another one is starting in an internship at Metatrack and potentially working on some Clojure. And another one is working on JavaScript. But the idea is that these concepts are basically concepts of composition. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. I'm going to share my screen now. I don't really have a lot of prepared material for you, but I do want to talk a little bit about the concept of LiveView. So LiveView is basically a framework like Elm, like Facebook React, like a number of frameworks like this, but instead of looking at things in the way of you get a request, you do something, and you get a response. That's basically a function or a procedure, normally with side effects. But what we're talking about is we basically build a core set of data. And then we can do 2 things. One, when the data changes, we can render the data. And second, when the first thing is we can render the data, and the second is we can change the data. And when the data changes, we automatically render. So I want to talk about the 2 phases that I want you to pay attention and notice as we solve a problem using LiveView tonight. The first phase, I'm going to call the mount phase. This is where we build the initial data for the LiveView, right? So what's going to happen is a request is going to come in, and Elixir is pure functional. That means everything calls a function, and normally the output of one function is chained to the input of another function. So there's something called an endpoint, and that basically establishes the whole configuration for the stack, and opens the sockets that are needed and things like that. Then it goes to a router layer. And if you're familiar with Ruby on Rails, with any number of the Java frameworks or JavaScript frameworks, with the Clojure frameworks, there's this router layer. And the router layer essentially establishes, it maps a route or a URL that you type onto some block of code to hook it to. So in the case of Elixir, and especially with LiveView, when a route comes in, we have the choice to map this thing onto a LiveView. And in the LiveView, the place that you start is a function called mount. And all that does is establishes the state for LiveView, right? So we're going to build this memory application. And so we're going to establish some initial data. So probably with just 1 hour to play with, what we'll do is we'll hard code some of the data, and we'll enable, just so that we can slow down so it won't be going at a breakneck speed. And then we'll code a special type of function called a reducer. And the reducer is a type of code that takes an accumulator of some type and returns the same data type that's transformed in some way. And what our memory program is going to do is it'll take some type of I don't know, a passage, a literary passage or a poem or something like that. And it takes the number of steps that you want to memorize this passage in. And every time that you press erase, it will delete a few more characters. And hopefully you can recite this passage until it's gone and you've got it memorized. So, and that's going to use a single reducer, right? And then the last piece is a render. So I need to juggle my my Zoom escape a little bit here. So, okay. So the last step is called a render. And so that's the first phase. And then after this phase, LiveView is going to send down a whole web page, and with a full text page, just like loading an initial page would. And the reason that that's important is that LiveView is going to play nice with SEO, with search engine optimization. Then after the first request, everything changes. So after we've mounted and established our initial data, which for us is initially we're going to say, hey, we're going to record the number of steps that we're going to use, and we're going to record the text passage that we want to memorize, and then we're going to build a reducer, and that reducer maybe we'll call, I don't know, like something like an eraser or something like that. And then we're going to render that thing. So after it's been rendered, LiveView is going to start waiting on requests. So when we're in the running phase, now we're in phase 2, we're waiting on a request. And LiveView does use JavaScript. It just doesn't use custom JavaScript, right? It lets the framework write a common set of JavaScript so that if there are certain decorations on, certain HTML attributes on a page, like if I have something called Phoenix click, it will detect any click on that particular web item, right? And then when it receives the click, the JavaScript will send a request up into the endpoint, up through the socket, and it will land in a handler, and I can change my state. So I receive an event, it gets mapped onto a handler, like handle event. And then after I change my state, if anything is different on the page, it'll render the state. And so that's what we're going to do. Okay, so enough of the presentation. If there's time and if there's interest, I'll shift gears a little bit and talk about the layers of this system. But for now, well, heck, we have a little bit of extra time, I think. So I told you that this is primarily going to be a design session, and it is. And so I recently wrote a book with a man named James Gray. He was really involved in the TextMate editor, wrote the famous book on that. He was really involved in the Ruby community. He led a podcast called Ruby Rogues. He wrote Faster CSV. He's one of the smartest men I've ever known. Now he's in the Elixir community, and we wrote this book together. But this man is an encyclopedia, and he basically started down the road writing this book and had a hard time organizing the fire hose of data. And OTP is kind of what Erlang and Elixir used to do, failure control and inter-process communication. So it's difficult to think about, but we came up with these layers. So everybody bring up your chat, and I want everybody to type this sentence to help you remember it. It starts at the bottom and works to the top. It's do fun things with big, loud worker bees. That's do fun things with big, loud worker bees. And so whatever language that you're working on, especially a functional language, it's nice to have a mental model of how things fit together. And most programming, it's wise to separate things from core concerns, which have predictable properties and kind of well-established sanitized data, and boundary layers that have things like process machineries that manage life cycles. So these layers stand for data, functions, tests, boundaries, lifecycles workers. That's data, functions, tests, boundaries, lifecycles workers. And if you haven't been typing it into the chat, you should be polluting this chat with the sentence, do fun things with big, loud worker bees. And then you should type also data, functions, tests, boundaries, lifecycles, and workers. We're going to spend most of our time in the data layer, the functions layer, and the boundary layer, just because we don't have time to do everything. But if you're interested in coming back and taking a class, we also cover testing philosophy, not just for Elixir, but for software, and in lifecycle management, which basically the idea is that if you can establish a way to start a service and take down a service and to detect when a service is down, then it's easy to build a lifecycle layer. So rather than start a process directly, you can ask the lifecycle manager to start the layer, right? So you could say lifecycle start, lifecycle stop, and then if there's a failure, the lifecycle layer can automatically shut everything down. And processes can have children too, and so they could shut those down as well, and bring them back up in the last known good state, which is normally the startup state. So if you've ever seen the IT crowd, does anybody remember what the guys down in the basement would say? And you can unmute to say this because it's that important. The British comedy, the IT crowd. Oh, come on.
Turn it on and off again.
Yeah.
Did you try turning it off and on again? Yes, yes. A cookie for you, sir. And so, so basically, the idea is if you have if you can detect failure, if you can stop and you can start, you can build systems with extraordinary reliability. Okay, so we're going to start our, we're going to create an application now. Mix Phoenix.new, and we're going to call this memos, and this is going to be a LiveView application. So this is going to generate a bunch of files, and yes, it's going to generate some, it's going to have some node that's going to run and watch our assets, our CSS, our images, and our JavaScript. That'll, there's basically a minimizer and that kind of stuff. So, but this is going to generate an opinionated stack and organization. So the two layers are well represented that we talked about. The do fun things, that's the core. And those things are going to be wrapped in the memos application, or the memos subdirectory under lib, or under lib. And the boundary layers, the big, loud wildebeests, they're going to be represented in the boundary area, which is memos web. So I'm going to change into memos, and I'm going to say mix phoenix.server. Okay, so it's going to start this application, and you can see that I've got some errors already. It looks like I haven't created my database yet, which makes perfect sense. So it is said the storage is not created for the repo, memo.repo. And then it says type mix ecto create. Or you could just press this shiny button that says create repo for app. Okay, so we're going to do that. It's the COVID, has to be the COVID. Okay, so this is a LiveView application. This was really boring until Jose and Chris worked on something called the Phoenix dashboard, which will allow you to see any process that's running on the site, kind of dive in and look at the individual details of any single one of these. And you can drop your own metrics on the homepage of this particular server. And it's a pretty incredible service. But we're not going to be playing in this dashboard very often. We're actually going to build our memorizer game. And remember, what we're going to do is, I don't want this. I want to edit the new application. So I'm going to change the memos directory. And I'm going to edit this application. And we said that there were two major divisions, one with the core features, right? So the core features are going to go in here. And the boundary features are going to go in here. And I'll lie to you a little bit. There's a service called a context that can often live in the lib directory. And in fact, our the file that we create, we're going to actually build a file called an eraser. And this is going to serve as like a hybrid boundary and core for us, right? So we're going to mix a little bit of the concerns, but I'm going to try to keep this as pure as possible. And the reason is that I can do many of the boundary type concerns in my live view, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit. But if you've not been a functional developer, I'm going to talk a little bit about an idea, an Elixir construct. This thing, a pipe character and a greater than sign, when they're together, my editor turns these into triangles, but this is an important thing in Elixir. This is a pipe, and it means, so if I have a function called kernel.plus, and I feed one into that function, it's going to add 1 as the first argument of the plus function, right? So it's taking the result of the thing on the left and passing it as the first argument of the thing on the right. And so a lot of Elixir development is shaping your code such that you have these beautiful pipeline flows. So it works especially well if you can do something like this. If you can have a constructor, and this just builds data in some way. If you're thinking about a Java constructor that instantiates a class, you're on the right track. And so we're going to call functions. So it's going to look something like this. So you can have like a bunch of constructors and a bunch of reducers, and your code can tell a really nice story, right? So when Elixir was very young, object-oriented developers were kind of stripped of the structure of the glue of their code. But when we moved over to Elixir, eventually we discovered that we could replace some of the flow with this concept of a pipe. And that happened when Dave Thomas wrote the book on Programming Elixir. And he had this little pipe at the bottom. It said pragmatic, then concurrent, fun, something like that, right? And so when Dave did that, and when he built the examples in his book, he elevated the importance of the pipe. So what we're going to try to do is shape our functions such that we have constructors followed by reducers. And for you Elixir pros, I know that I'm lying to you a little bit, right? I know that my reducers aren't technically reducers that would work in enum reduce. I want you to put that aside and think about it as just a logical concept, right? So the idea that if I have def step or forward, and it has some position, I could say position plus 1, right? And if I have def backward, that would be position minus 1, and right. So this is like a pirate's treasure map. Def origin, and then this is just a 0 that I could do something like this. I could say origin, pipe to forward, pipe to forward, pipe to backward. And that gives me, that tells a story. This is the structure that we're after in our core, right? Something that tells a story. So, okay, so I'm gonna say def module. This is just a container and a namespacing feature that holds functions in Elixir, and we're in memos dot, and we're gonna build an eraser. And so remember, the first type of function that we were going to look at was a constructor, right? And so this is a constructor, and I'm going to have private functions and public ones. if I forget to tell you, basically, if there's no P, this is public. And that means that, that any other module can see it. Otherwise, it's visible only to this module. So that's important because the eraser API is determined by the public functions, the ones without P. Okay, so I'm going to take the text and I want to, well, no, let's take the text and the steps. And I'm going to say, I'm going to basically build a structure. This looks a little bit like a class if you hold your head sideways, you know, a little bit, right? In Java or in Ruby, but basically these are the attributes that I'm going to be working with often. So one of them is the text. So, and we're going to, let's see, let's have defaults. Right. And then we'll have steps 3. I think that this is going to save me a little bit of time. So I'm going to throw a little bit of syntax at you, but I just have to say, trust me at this point, right? So I'm going to say, oh, no, I don't. Yes, I do. No, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to throw syntax at you. Yeah, so this is a function that creates a structure and right. And so otherwise, if there's none of that, if you don't pass text or steps, we want to pick up the default values. And so all we're going to do is this. Right. So so basically Elixir, these are different functions because they have a different number of arguments. If I don't specify any arguments, I just say, give me the struct, which is going to give me this data right here. So why don't we go ahead and start IEX. So we can start playing with some concepts, right? So, so I can say alias or even import, and this will allow me to call the functions in here without typing memos.eraser, right? So, and no, I'm going to alias it. And this does the same thing, only it will force me to type only the last thing in this namespace chain, right? So for example, I could say eraser.new, right? And eraser.new gave me, oh, how about that? I didn't save. Okay, so now I have a new map. So % open mustache or curly brace. I'm going to say mustache because my students love it. And if you have a module name, it's a map that's also a struct, which means it's limited to the keys of text and steps. Okay. So the text is going to be like this. The steps is going to be like that. Let's see. This is not going to be the final form of what we need for our eraser, right? So I think that probably is something that's going to work well for us. Let's say text is equal to V4. So I'm grabbing the result of this line, which is this, right? Dot text. So now I have text that's, did you try turning it off and on again? And so maybe what we should do is play with this a little bit. So the length of this is, so if I get lazy and don't type the parentheses, don't freak out. It's really the same thing. But so if I do that in the compiled code, Elixir will complain and tell me I need parentheses most of the time. So basically what I'm looking for is a way to think about building not just the first step, but to tell Elixir at every particular step exactly which characters that I'm going to delete. And if I do that, it's going to be much easier to create the overall effect that we're looking for in the reducer. So maybe there's a range of 1 to 40. So what this is essentially a list of every number from 1 to 40, right? And so let's think about this for a while. So maybe if there are, let's say if there are 2 steps or let's say 4 steps, dot shuffle. Right, so now we have a random list. And so maybe if we carve these up into chunks, right? So maybe enum dot, so maybe I could build this into, no, I basically want to grab what I've done so far, right? And pass that to enum dot chunk every, maybe if it's every 10, then I would have, so 10 for 4 steps, right? So now this is something that I can work with. So this is a schedule based on the length of the text, right? So I have a little bit of math to do in here. I can work with that. So if I say that my def struct needs this, so the text is that, and the schedule, and I'm going to actually do this. The steps is going to default to 3. And the schedule is that. Oh, that's great. Somebody is right outside my door with a barking dog. Awesome.
It's not so terrible.
That's just awesome. Okay. So so that's to serves me right for all the times I've stood outside my neighbor's house, right? Okay, so I'm going to say the schedule is going to be build. And so we know how to build it, right? So we need the text and the steps. We need to do a little bit of math, but we know what that looks like because we've been working in the console. Def P, build, schedule. So what does that def P mean? Somebody new, not experienced with Elixir? Is that public or private?
Don't be shy, guys. Speak up.
I'm very patient. I'm not going to say anything. I'm on a strike. You can guess. You only have to say public or private. Okay. We need. Okay, I'm going to be very quiet until that question is answered.
I'd answer for you, Bruce, but I do know the answer, so I want to let somebody else who didn't.
Yeah, you're not allowed to answer. I would have gone on a strike. Size is equal to. It's going to be much more fun if somebody tries to answer. Public or private, that's all you have to say. You can guess, 50-50 chance. Okay, you can give me the answer. I won't. Go ahead. Come on. Tell them.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yes. The P means private.
Yes. So this is not going to participate in our API. So I know I'm in the right track if my constructors return the data type that's associated with this class, and these do, right? And if all the other functions take this argument first, if they take an eraser first. Private ones, I don't care. I give them a pass. This is just a code organization technique, right? So now we need to build this step size. And so the step size, let's see that I see if I have a text that's 5 long, and I can do a divided by. So I'm using this format so I can pipe it because I just think in pipes often, right? So let's say that there are 2 steps, right? So this is 2.5. What should the step size be, do you think, if there are 5 characters and we're going to memorize this in 2 shots? Should we round up or down? Probably round up, right? So I can do that with seal. Okay, this looks good to me. So this is I could actually say size and steps, right? Step size, and the size steps. So we're going to start with the size, and then we're going to pipe that to, let's be pretty. Or actually, I could just say size over divided by steps, right? Size divided by steps, and then I can pipe that much to seal. Stands for ceiling. So I'm not a fan of all of the abbreviations, but you know, Jose was, and his language. Okay, so let's see if we're getting a schedule out of this. Okay, so that looks good. So now we could say, we can call this new one, can't we? No, this isn't going to work. I need to call this. You have to say, no, I'm going to delete this one. That would be a shame, wouldn't it? So our default, I'm going to remove this default. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to say, there's no good way. So I could default both of those. Let's see if I can do that. No, I don't think I want to do that. So I think I'm just going to leave this alone. And then I can, here it is. This is what I'm looking for. Yes, because I've defaulted this much, right? And then I could say build the schedule. Okay. And then I could build the schedule. The problem is that my build schedule is going to return something. So this is the new schedule, right? Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to basically return the new schedule as part of the struct. And all this is doing is saying, I want to take, well, let's see. And then I want to do, I'm getting myself in so much trouble here. You know, I think I'm going to go simple. So it's going to go really pretty. So what I was trying to do is build a really pretty version that managed. So I'm going to, okay, this is probably the best I can do. I'm going to say default text. So I need this in more than one place, right? So I'm going to set the default text to this, right? This is a module attribute. So it's kind of like a, I don't know, like a, what would the Java equivalent be?
I feel like they're constants, right? Like
constants,
kind of
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a module attribute. Basically, it
Right.
sets at compile time this value. And this can be changed, though a constant can't. But it's gone by runtime. So basically, this is replaced. This has been substituted at runtime. And so this is going to let me do something like this. I can say new, and then I can say default text, and I'm going to pick up the default steps right here, right? So that's great. So I haven't repeated any of that work. So now I've got the build schedule. That looks good. The step size looks good, and I can recompile this. New schedule is unused. Yeah, because we were going to use this in my trick that I don't need anymore, right? So now, okay, great. So now,
pay attention to the warnings.
What's that?
I say it's always good to pay attention to the warnings.
Absolutely, right? And now, okay, yeah. So now look, we have a schedule so this tells us, this means at step 1, we're going to delete characters 27, 4, 32, 24, 2, and so on and so forth, right? So this is cool. So now we have to build our reducer. Remember that there were 2 major types of functions. One was the constructor, that's here. Now we need a reducer. And I think I'm going to move this up because this is really the primary purpose of the API, right? And a reducer is going to take something of a type. And this type will be the one defined by this struct right there. Okay, so now we have an eraser. And this eraser, look at this. We can do some pattern matching, right? And what that means is I could say, hey, Elixir, I know this thing is coming in, it's going to be a map. Well, it's a struct, but a struct is also a map. And I think that we're going to have a schedule, and a schedule is going to be broken down into a head and the rest of the schedule. Maybe we'll call this a step, right? And so now we could actually play some games here. We could say now we have the exact step. So if a character is in this is what's going to be deleted, right? So now we're going to say we need the new text. Okay, so now we're going to have to play around with this text. Okay, so let's start to manipulate this step by step. So I've done some internationalization. So that means I know that you don't want to try to cut up characters in the middle, right? So there's this function, there's one in every language, but in Elixir, this cuts things into individual strings, right? And so now I have a perfect way to represent, to iterate through these. And what we're going to do is actually attach an index to each one, right? So now, it's starting to come together because I can filter these by whether or not they're in the list. But there's a problem. We've started our index at 1, and this is 0 based. So what we'll do is with index, we'll build a 1 offset instead. And you can see that now this goes from 1 all the way to 40. So we're in pretty good shape. And so now we want to filter this. enum.filter. I think that we're far enough along. This is, I kind of know where this is going. So let's go ahead and take this, and we're going to say, okay, here's our eraser. So we're going to start with the text. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the text out of there at the same time. So I'm going to start with the text, and then I'm going to do all the work that I was doing here, right? And then there's another one right there. Okay, so now we're with index, and now I could say enum dot, let's map over this, right? And so we're going to take this is a function. So enum.map calls the function for every character that's in this list. Actually, it's going to be for every tuple, right? Because now we have something that looks like this. And so I'm going to say we're going to get for a tuple that's in there, and I'm going to say replace grapheme, and I'm going to pass it the tuple. Right? And so now, what does the P mean?
Me again? Private.
No.
Sorry.
Somebody else. Give me the answer that he just gave you. I'm going to go on strike. I swear I will.
I feel like everybody's like muted and can't unmute themselves or something. That's bizarre.
Okay.
That isn't a host or something.
All right. So
I don't know.
Okay. So I guess I won't go on strike. Maybe it's a hardware problem. Okay. So I'm going to say we're going to replace the grapheme. Remember, this doesn't participate in the API. right? This is just a function that, a local function that's going to help us solve the problem. So, and we're going to get, this is going to be a grapheme, and it's going to be an index. Let's see. Oh, you know what? We can actually do better than this, right? We could say the grapheme, and the index. This is going to be the grapheme, and index is that index in the step. Ah, that's beautiful. I love that line of code, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're going to map over, we're going to start at the first one, right? So that's this one. And we also have a step, and the step looks like this, right? So if the character, we're going to replace the character, right? And we're going to pass the character itself, which the first one is going to be the D, and the first index is going to be 1, but we're going to check to see if the index is in the step. So the first one would be false, and the next one would be true, because true is in 2 is in this list, right? And so it would erase that character. And then all we have to do is join those together again. Okay, so now we have to write the replace, right? So if this is true, that means, yes, we want this to be replaced. Underscore, right? So basically, together, these two function heads make one function. And basically, I'm pattern matching. If this is true, if the second argument is true, then I basically wipe the character out. And if it's false, I maintain the grapheme as it is. So maybe I'll spell that out. Okay, and then I also don't like this name anymore because it might replace it, it might not. So I'm going to call this maybe replace the grapheme, right? And that's going to give me a good hint that the last thing is a function. Okay, so now we get to return the result. So trust me on this syntax. All this means is that I'm returning something of this struct that takes this form, right? And so that it's going to take text. And this is the new text after we've done the work, right? And we don't have to process the whole schedule anymore. We're down to the rest of the schedule, right? Beautiful. Okay, so let's see if this works in the console. And believe it or not, our LiveView application is almost done. So I'm going to recompile.
Hey, Bruce, I don't mean to interrupt your flow, man, but just everybody now should be able to unmute themselves, so you guys got no excuse for not saying something. Ask you
okay, great. Okay, so somebody help me debug this function. It says undefined function may be replaced grapheme /2. Ah, look. I have the braces around it, right? So I don't really take those, I take these. Yeah, maybe that was an advance, a little bit too advanced. Okay, eraser is unused. So where is this unused? Eraser. Okay, so we don't need to this name. That's great. So let's see. Okay, so now we're recompiling. And so I'm going to start. So how do I start my flow? What's my constructor? Here are your choices. New or erase? Which one's a constructor? Unmute yourself. Go for it. You know you want to. Be interactive. remember interactive before the COVID. I can't draw this crowd out.
Yeah, I know.
New is the constructor. It's new. And what is the reducer? Hint, it's not the one that's new. It's erase. Yeah. So what is eraser.new going to return? There it is, right? Let's call this the this initial state equals eraser.new, because I don't want to keep showing you what happens if we run the random numbers again every time, right? Because that would get really confusing to explain. So I'm going to say now we have an initial state. How do I erase some characters? Well, I call eraser.erase. And I'm going to recite that because I want to memorize this phrase. Did you try turning it off or again? Dang, shoot. Okay, so now we're going to erase it again. Did you try turning it off and on again? And again. Okay, and that's done. Only it would be really nice if we ignored punctuation, right? So I think what I'm going to do is, and this is going to be a question mark, and what did I do? Oh, just a fat finger there. A question mark, a space, and a period. And I think that's it. And so let's go ahead and just add another function head here, right? We can match G, and I don't care. That's my test, right? When G is in, so if the G is in, ignore the replacements, I want to return the G. I don't want to replace it, right? Okay, so now let's try this again. That's nice, right? So now if I'm in one of these intermediate steps, it's going to give me my clues, right? So that's what threw me off when I couldn't memorize the time before. Let's try now. Did you try turning it off and on again? Ha, it works. Perfect. Okay, so now let's go ahead and cut into our live view, right? So we said that there were two phases, right? There was the initial mount phase, and there was the next phase, right? Here is a live view that's an example, and we're going to go ahead and grab the front of this. We also need a router, so let's call this live game, and we're going to call this game live. I don't need this. This is called a live action. I'm going to leave that off just to keep things simple for the rest of the evening. And we're going to go ahead and establish something that is, we're going to establish our new live view in here. So this is going to be game live.ex. Remember, this is going to live where the rest of the web controls or the web constructs do. And I'm going to grab the code that I stole from the other view. I'm going to strike this impl equals true because I don't want to talk about behaviors. You know, there's not enough time here. But mount, essentially, I want you to write this, open up your chat, and if you have not been interactive, be interactive now. This will help you if you ever get back into the live view. Remember, write down this. The socket is the state for a live view. I hear people typing. I hear more people typing. It's beautiful. It's kind of beautiful. So basically, a socket is a map. It's going to look like this, but basically, inside the map, there's going to be some values, some key value pairs. And there's a special key in socket for the custom data that we're allowed to touch. And so we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need text. Or actually, all we really need is an eraser. And then I can say eraser.new. Later on, if we were working on this application, we might have a form that allowed you to take in the different fields for an eraser, right? But so here we could take the number of steps in the default text, but I'm just going to go ahead and let that sit just like that, right? And then I'm going to write a function called render, right? Remember, there's that, yeah. So remember, there's that special key in assigns, and in the socket called assigns, and this is basically the custom data. But I'm going to write something called a sigil. And I want to point out while I'm here that I don't have to drop this code into the view. It's helpful for instructional purposes because everything is in one place, but I could drop it into a template, right? This code could sit exactly where this code sits, right? And what this means is that there is a Elixir bit of sugar that's custom programmed that's going to take this multi-line string and it's going to return the structures that Elixir needs to only send down the changes when something changes here. So I'm going to say H1, memorize this. And then I'm going to give it, I have a little imagination. My user interfaces are all H tags. So we're going to say in the eraser, and all this is sugar for assigns eraser, right? But I'm going to specify it this way because it looks like other templating languages. Eraser.text. Right? So this is my substitution. And the way to read this is that the first pass through, remember this is the mount phase. When we hit our route, so we hit the route here in the router. We said, okay, we're going to call game live. And so game live, we're going to call the mount function. And we've changed data. So that means that this is going to render, but the full text of this application is going to render. It's going to come down, right? And I'm going to go ahead and drop a button in. How about just erase some like that? Okay, so now I ought to be able to run this application except alias, what was it? Memos.eraser. Okay, so now we ought to be able to go to our live view. We have a syntax error somewhere, but let's go ahead and go to game. Cannot define page live yet. We didn't change that, did we? Okay, so page live, this is going to be game live. Okay, beautiful. This has not been saved. Now it has. Beautiful. Great. Okay. Did you try turning it off and on again and erase some and it didn't do anything? But I can change that really quickly, right? So the way LiveView works is that I'm going to decorate this HTML with HTML attributes. And one of those is Phoenix click. And what it's going to do is send me an event called erase whenever a user clicks that button, right? So I haven't reloaded this, but there's a code watcher that has. So if I inspect this element, we should be able to see that there's this Phoenix click attribute on it here, right? And so if I try to click this, boom, I get a crash, right? Well, that's great because Phoenix has recognized that I'm trying to capture this event, but there's no code to capture it. In fact, this is exactly game live. That's our live view. And this is the function that it's going to try to call. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, right? And so there's my socket. So this is exactly what my code should look like. Great. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to define that, erase. I don't really care about this metadata. We didn't put anything in it. This is a socket. What is a socket, everybody? I'm growling.
The stateful LiveView.
Yes, I love you.
Yeah, nice.
I love you so much. Okay, and so we're going to say erase, and that's going to be a reducer over socket, right? Remember, we want to slice our code into constructors and reducers and one final form of a transformer, right? This is a converter or a transformer. This is essentially a reducer, right? Because it comes in with a socket and it returns another form of a socket. And I'm just going to build a reducer that lives up here. And the reducer, all I have to do is call, I need to call erase socket.assigns erase. And I basically need to put this thing, remember, the socket is the state of the LiveView and assigns is the special place where I put all of my custom data. And eraser is that thing that I put in there that I built with my constructor, right? So now all we have to do is take this. We have to take, we have to assign socket, and the eraser is going to be this thing right here, right? And all this assign function does is drop this into my socket, right? Okay. Okay, unexpected. So on LiveView 20, should be easy. So that is eraser, socket assigns eraser. Anybody see it? Oh, yeah. No, I don't see it. Anybody see it? This is telling me, let's see, undefined function, game, handle event is undefined or private. Oh, that's the earlier one. Oh, compilation error right here. Unexpected parenthesis, open parenthesis on line 20. So it's probably an earlier send. So assign open parenthesis socket and then eraser, and that's the value. Maybe I could see this better. So that's lining up. This looks good to me. Anybody seeing anything? Oh,
what's up with the word erase there on 18 instead of, is that supposed to be eraser or something
18?
like that? Yeah.
This guy right here?
No, the next word over.
So this is the module. This is the module. This is our module that services our functional core. Mm-hmm. This is an eraser, right? So we say, well, what's the data that's associated with this? So that's an eraser, right? And what's the function that you call to do the erasing? That's erase.
That's erase. Okay.
Right. So yeah. So I found the bug. The bug was I had I didn't have enough parentheses. Right. It's like it thought it was.
Oh,
Lisp
I gotcha.
Something. It thought it was Lisp or something. Right.
Right.
Okay. So so now I have the assign. No, that should be correct. Is it?
It looked right before to me with the parens, but because I was looking at that.
1, 2. So my editor thinks I'm right now. Live 20. Okay, compilation, live 20. Okay, so def erase. So I wonder if this is an earlier problem. So that is those match, right? So this is, I'm closing that up. There's signs due. That looks good. Let's see. So let's erase this guy. Let's see what's happening. Undefined function erase. Okay, so it has to be in there somewhere, right? Or it wouldn't have parsed. So I'm going to assign socket and the eraser. So that's basically this right here is a key value pair, right? So eraser colon, that's if you coded Ruby before, you know that the last argument, and this actually came from Ruby syntax. So if the last argument is a key value list, you can eliminate the brackets around it, the square brackets around it. So that should be okay. So, and this is also, my error has to be up here somewhere. So let's see. So 18, you dog, erase socket. Can we one line this just to kind of change things up? Is that going to give us any more data?
I don't see anything you've done wrong.
I don't either. Okay, so it has to be earlier in the file, right? So let's see, what if this is?
But you're able to do the uppercase E and erase there on I guess it's 13 now. That's what's kind of throwing me. And see how it says names and identifiers.
Erase on 13. On
just erase, right? Shouldn't that be a lowercase e? That's.
Oh yes.
That's what keeps getting. That's what I got to earlier.
Erase. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
right. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Awesome.
Boom.
Hey.
Boom.
Love it. Beautiful.
Boom. Which is pretty amazing, right? And so I think that we could play some games to, make this prettier, right? Maybe we do that. Boom, boom, boom. So it's really pretty cool. And so let's try that. There we go. So it's not getting my spaces correct, but I think that that's pretty good for a very short amount of time, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what have we learned so far, right? So what we've done is really very little LiveView. This function doesn't do too much work. It doesn't really save us that much work. But what you can see is that everywhere that I have interaction on the page, then the hardware, or I'm sorry, the software, the custom software in LiveView, the library handles all the communication between the client and the server, right? And when I get communication, I don't jump straight to render, right? What do? I change my state. And if my state changes, all I do is re-render, right? And so one of the things that I want to point out is that when we click the render button, right? So I'm going to reload this. And when I click erase something, I want to show how tiny the payload is when I'm working with this, right? And so I want to show the JavaScript editor, JavaScript console, right? And I want to basically grab one of these sockets. I think it might be, let's see if it's that first one, right? Yeah, and look how much is coming down. Very tiny amount of data, right? I'm going to click it again. It's such a tiny amount, right? It only sends down anything that is changed in this field here, which is amazing, right? And so your form validation, it only sends down data when something changes. It only sends down errors when the errors are tripped. So what you get is something that's extremely efficient because Elixir and Erlang are very consistent in terms of not letting threads lag, of detecting when there's problems, shutting down problems and starting them again. Did you try turning it off and on again, right? It's very high concurrency, and this is a concurrency game. So you see a lot of frameworks trying to attempt to get a feel that's similar to LiveView, and they're failing. Why? Because with LiveView, I have pretty much a guarantee that if I send down 2,000 events, well, the slowest one is only going to be 10 seconds, or 10 seconds, 10% slower than the fastest one. In Ruby, that's very much not true. In Java, in JavaScript, in Python, these are very much not true. You have things like memory management, right? You have to, anytime that you're freeing your block of, you're freeing memory, you could basically jump off a cliff as the memory management is tripping in, right? So it's really an incredibly efficient system in that we're normalizing the flow, right? The second thing that this does for me is this puts my head all in one place. So this application was not a distributed development experience. This application was like I was developing only on the server because I was, right? So web development became really easy for a little while because we were able to put our heads in one place on the server and we were able to leave it there. But once they started to become these interactive distributed applications again, that didn't just span the client and the server, they also spanned the client, the server, and programming languages and database servers. It all became too much. But LiveView lets me keep everything in my head in one place. And so I think that this is going to be massively important, not just for the Elixir community, but really for programming in general. At Programmer Passport, that's a program that Groxio has where you have a subscription. We're taking our monthly subscription away. We're only doing yearlies so that we track only serious people who want to improve their career. But we're treating both OTP and LiveView as if they were their own languages. Very much like we're going to treat TensorFlow like it's its own language, because there's so many new and important concepts and innovations in the space. And I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and take questions. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to open up my chat. Look at all those. I'm going to step out and step back in and see if I can see Bruce's screen again. Sorry about that.
It froze up for me, Bruce, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'm back now. So
questions? You can type them into the chat if you would like.
Bruce, I have a quick one.
Sure.
So I don't know how much you've actually used LiveView on let's say, production type projects. But one thing that I was thinking about is so LiveView is fantastic, right? Like I think that's, oh my gosh, I would love to just use this, right? But then I think, well, you look at React or whatnot, and React is the one that I'm most familiar with. There's a zillion pretty nice components that are already essentially built in with libraries that have really nice functionalities, right? From kind of a UX and UI experience. And that is I was just looking and I see they have live components now, right? Which I have to dig into a little bit, a little bit more. But do you have any thoughts on that? Has anybody talked about that? As far as about hey, how do we kind of reproduce what's already here, with this really vibrant ecosystem?
So the first thing, we don't want to reproduce what's done in JavaScript, right? So the reuse model for components in JavaScript is broken, right? You can see that in the dependencies. You can see that in the way things compose or really don't compose, right? Dependencies are in the wrong places. Elixir is very much a different story because, basically when Chris and Jose worked together really since somewhere around 2013 or 2014, they started working on infrastructure, right? And they didn't move forward until everything composed the way that they wanted it to. So with that said, when you actually build with LiveView, a lot of what you're reusing is actually on the server, right? And those types of libraries should come around more quickly. But the other thing that's happened in the last 3 or 4 months is that the JavaScript integration into the LiveView flow has become much more secure, and it's in two places. One, there's a hook for downbound client, right? And that means that I can send data down to the DOM, maybe on the timer, and stitch it into the DOM without having it go through the event lifecycle.
Yeah, that wasn't there. That wasn't there when I started playing around with it, and I said it's got to come, right? And then I heard kind of like conjecture, and okay, that's good to know.
And the second one is that there's an outbound client or outbound hook also, and that's you can hook any JavaScript event and have it participate in the LiveView lifecycle.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, that kind of honestly solves it, right? Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. I mean, they've kind of come a long way with that.
But again, I think that we need to rethink we need to reevaluate what's important to us, right? So the idea that that you can build these things that compose in an object-oriented like way is broken, right? The node dependency stack is broken. The security violations in the node dependency stack, I mean, you could tell, I have like 847 vulnerabilities, and some of those I'm told are related to, it's just like server-side stuff, and some of it's not. But what do I do? I'm not a JavaScript guy. I really don't want to be.
The use case I'm kind of talking about is more like, let's say just a simple thing, well, a simple yet not so simple thing, right? Like a type ahead, right? Or like an autofill as you're typing, or tags or something, right? These are things that people don't.
Very good. Very good in LiveView. So there's a validate hook on forms. So one of the things that I demonstrate if I have like 2 or 2.5 hours with this problem is called a schemaless change set, right? So if you're working with a database component, you basically say, hey, I want this to be validate required, this to be validate length and everything. And I plug that in, and then I have the LiveView component. Basically, LiveView forms will basically fire validations for every change of the form. And it's surprisingly efficient now. And it also fires a save form when you save the form, right? So you get at every change, and you can debalance if you want to, if you're worried about sending too much traffic.
Yep. Good. All right, that's good to know too. I'm gonna have to definitely play around with that, because that's like one of those, like, it looks simple, but then when you start getting into a few complexities, and I know LiveView is extremely efficient, right? Like you said, you showed those payloads. When I built my project, I looked at the same thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like nothing, right? Like,
yeah.
So.
And so what I would encourage you to do is stop thinking about things as if they were a JavaScript world, right? Yeah. The problem is that if you think about it like it's a JavaScript world, then you're going to be thinking, what can't this do that JavaScript does? Okay.
One is bigger problem for Node.js because they need some specific permissions for running your machine, and create so many security issues. And one of these things, Daniel tries to how to figure out and create some better and safety place for running JavaScript in your machine or production and so on. But I think it could be needs to much things for try to investments for good environment for demo development and so on for I don't know say this in English because I'm Portuguese, no, but it's touching some point for poor in productions environments, so I think it's very unstable, and they have so many problems to figure out some place for handler for your package installations and so on. It's something like that for create for Deno. They don't would like to create some central core for your handler, your package for installers and so on.
Yeah, yeah, and so I mean, so there's a lot of thoughts there, right? So, so some of the problems don't get completely solved, but they get better when you depend on infrastructure rather than custom code to solve a problem, right? Like I mean, there's a lot of really sophisticated JavaScript behind what's happening here, right? And there's like a testing model that's not a headless browser, but it still has to do DOM replacement. So there's a lot of stuff, but it's infrastructure, and more people are using the infrastructure. That's really important, right? The second thing is that there are a lot of things that we need to do, like the idea of running JavaScript on the client, running disconnected. That's a big deal, right? It's becoming less of a big deal, but it's still a big deal. And so there are some things happening there's a project called Lumen, which does WebAssembly. It's working on Elixir. It's not there yet. Might get there. We hope it gets there. But when it does, then you're starting to build in some of the same kinds of problems, right? You're starting to do a lot of heavy custom development on the client. And I think that we need to be getting away from that. That we need to try to be as clear and precise as possible. I mean, I think that we're optimizing the wrong thing. I think that we're trying to go all the way down and get corner cases for our end users when we really ought to be thinking about user experience. And if we can iterate faster on our end user requirements, then we're better off than if we get that last little bit of smoothness and experience. And I mean, LiveView can do an awful lot. So we actually just built a Tetris game that I played internationally. In a server in the United States, and played it from India, and it was it actually ran.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've got to look up that Tetris demonstration. I've been trying, and Mike was able to convince his company to do Elixir. I've been trying, and it's like, we have these issues with scaling, and it's like, good Lord, this has already been solved. Elixir has done it. Listen to me,
Right. Right. I mean, the main thing is it's very hard to stop the world to do a new implementation, right? But what you can do is you can say, if we could do this, is this interesting someday? And if I can solve this problem that's very difficult to solve. So in a place in Pinterest, it was, how do you do fraud detection, right? That was small enough and isolated enough where they made a lot of headway that way. At Bleacher Report, there was a global directory, right? And they basically started their migration that way. And that became a 5-year migration, but extremely cost effective for them, right? Because they were in a place where they had this Ruby infrastructure.
Yeah.
And they had, they were deciding, hey, when people land on our site, we'll serve the page, right? And then when push notifications happen and they built them into the application, Kevin Durant gets traded, right? Kevin Durant gets traded, 20 million push notifications go out, 10 million users land on the server within seconds. And the Ruby stack of servers glows a dull red and melts to this slide on the floor. Right. And so they did solve that problem where, my friend Ben Marks, who's recently moved on, but he was one of 3 people supporting the Super Bowl rather than their whole development team. And support meant that he just had to have his phone with him.
Wow.
And never got a call.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Never got a call. Super Bowl, Bleacher Report.
Right.
And did Alphonse, did you get your question answered, or did you? Alphonse, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you, Bruce, for the example. I just have a question about,
Sure.
Are there some, or do you know some good reference about working with Umbrella app, and especially distributed deployment, like Distillery, in order to not only step back from probably React or just integrate LiveView. I mean, in order to probably patch or rethink or redesign the backend when you are already working with another front-end framework.
Yeah. So I think that the nice thing about working with Elixir is there are so many. If you're willing to go with an iterative approach, and there are some places that where it makes 100% sense today, you don't have to wait, right? So you asked a couple of questions, and I want to get to the ones that I can remember. One, you asked about distillery. So right now, that feature is built into Elixir as releases, right? And so that, I think that went in Elixir 1.9, might have been 1.8. Does anybody know for sure? But basically, so that's what you're looking for. So there's a great discussion about Elixir and deployment really in the dark ages. In a book that I wrote with Jose and Ben Marks, my friend at Bleacher Report, called Adopting Elixir. It's pretty old, but it will tell you, it can basically point you to where some of the interesting things are happening, right? But since then, a good number of things have changed. Like we saw the LiveView dashboard, and so telemetry has changed a lot. So measuring, monitoring is pretty easier. Is a lot easier. There are better deployment stories. I'm working with Gig Elixir, which is running Kubernetes on the Google stack. Then there are other stacks. I mean, I think Heroku has one, and there are a number of other very good solutions. Heroku is they're trying to hold on a little bit too tight in that they have some solutions that open up what's basically the Elixir distributed architecture, which you need to run Observer and basically do all the monitoring and measuring that you need to do. But not until you raise yourself to a enterprise class customer. So, but Gig Elixir certainly is a good one. There are a number of deployment options that have come on in the last couple of years. So you mentioned something about distributed applications. I didn't quite get where you were going there.
I mean, if like integrating LiveView to like a current project is like, do you think it's like straightforward to just integrate LiveView, or do you think?
So the nice thing is that when you see Phoenix LiveView, you'll see that it is part of Phoenix, right? And in terms of there are always easier integrations and harder integrations to do, right? So when you're in any language, if you have to share a database, I think that that most people would tell you to run away kicking and screaming, right? So if the best thing that you can do is find a vertical service, whether that's a service layer that you can make completely independent, or whether that's a service layer with a user interface that you can, that's on the side of the application rather than part of a formal application. That's the way to get started, right? I think that just about everybody has tried the approach of doing of rebuilding the house, with when your other one's on a trailer going down the highway. I don't know, I'm mixing metaphors pretty poorly, but just about everybody has tried to build an application while another one is in deployment, and and that's difficult to do. What you really need to be able to do is carve off, do all the interface work in advance, build a clean separation, and then implement a new service. That's how everybody has been successful with beginning to look at what Elixir can do for them.
I have a question. We has one function for handler the entire calls for LiveView in Phoenix, called handler events only, or we has other functions to handle these calls.
Okay, Are you an OTP person? I know you're on Groxia. Are you on?
Yes, I'm a fresh
All right, all right.
person.
Okay, so let me review a little bit for not for you, but for others on the call, for your brother maybe. So basically, LiveView is built on Phoenix, and Phoenix is built on OTP. So the communication with Phoenix is a socket. And so you can actually see that socket defined in a file called endpoint.ex. So that's the inbound code. The inbound code is very shortly consumed by a gen server. And the gen server does handle calls and handle casts. And obviously there are other messages that are sent with native message passing, right? So everywhere that I use to handle event, right, that is a handle cast, right? It's really round trip, but only the outbound is done with OTP. The communication back down to the client, that's handled by the framework. So it's really all handle cast, which means it's one way, which means it's an asynchronous call. Okay, you'll see another communication mechanism called handle info. Handle info is able to consume any message that you send with Erlang or Elixir send, right? So you basically, if you're in OTP, if there's a message that comes into your mailbox, it's going to get processed. And if it's structured for OTP, it will be a handle call or a handle cast, right? So infos are not structured for OTP. They always come in as handle info, right? And so you can access that with a broadcast-based service called publish subscribe. And that means that if you're interested in a family of messages, so I see the jersey, so maybe there's a channel for the Brazilian football team, right? And so I could basically subscribe to interest, and then there's another server out there, as Ronaldo scores his goal, right? There's a publish an event, and so all those events come in through something called publish subscribe. Now, so if you're consuming messages from other input sources, it's really, really easy in Phoenix, because basically the messages come in and then you publish them out on a channel, and then everyone that's listening can consume the message. And it's really, really efficient, and it's implemented in a distributed way, right? So.
Yes, I have another question. So LiveView running on, we has supervisor for LiveView or not?
Yes, so actually, let me share my screen and we'll look at some of these things that we've been talking about and make them a little bit less abstract. Okay, so every Elixir application has to make a decision. Do they want to be a formal OTP application or not, right? If you decide, yes, I want to be an OTP application, and Phoenix is, the way this works is that there is a supervisor, right? And when you hear the word supervisor, don't think supervision first. I want you to think lifecycle, right? So if I go to my IEX, I'm in IEX here, and I say H gen server, or I'm sorry, supervisor, right? Right? Look at the number of times that lifecycle words show up, right? Everything in blue, shut down, that's lifecycle. Restart, permanent death, that's lifecycle, right? I can go up, start link, lifecycle, start and shut down. When I go to the code, children, that's another lifecycle term, right? That's how do I start and stop things, right? Which things depend on me? These are lifecycle terms. So what happens is that when you start Phoenix, it's going to start this supervisor, and well, it's a lifecycle thing. So it's going to start the database repository, start the telemetry, and that actually makes measurements, starts the publish subscribe thing that we just talked about, and starts the endpoint, right? And the endpoint is where we define the communication for the, let's see, there's the endpoint right there. So there's all the data that comes in for channels, right? And here's all the information that comes in for the applications of the style that we built, called a live socket, right? And this is just the set of policies that everything needs to go through. So if we're in development mode, we do all these things, but everything is going to do the telemetry plug, the request ID, parse different kinds of code. These are all individual functions, and you can look them up and see exactly what they are. And the very last one in the list is a router, right? So yes, it's an OTP application, and this gets done first. Then every request comes in the endpoint, and then it goes straight to the router. And you can see every single function, plugs are just functions, that gets called, right? And so I don't know if I answered your question. What I hope that I showed you is, yes, this is an OTP application that it's an OTP application because it specifies its supervisor that automatically gets called when it starts up. And when it starts up, it also starts its children. And every request comes in and does exactly this work. Did that help?
Yes. I need to think up more about and read more, because some things I don't comprehension very well, because my level on my studying about Elixir and most Phoenix too, because I never touched in Phoenix.
Yeah. So, but anyway, you are tremendously helpful with Groxia with all of your work and all of your notes. It's very, very helpful. Thank you so very much.
No problem. I very enjoy, so because I need to more focus and attentions for these words and try to figure out the entire examples. And yes, it's very fun, and try things and learn about. And I really enjoyed the sections for try yourself, because they shake you, and yes, man, you need to try something different. You don't
good.
learning in PDF, a book, or in the other contents for Groxio. It's
yeah. So Maggie will send you your $20. Thanks for the advertisement. Yeah, no, that's very kind. And just keep plugging. So the OTP stuff is exactly what you're looking for. And the LiveView is chasing right behind that. So I think that you're going to have, you're coming in at exactly the right time.
Yes, another words for about Groxio. I see a friend of mine assigned Elixir course too, and I always talking about with him about the exercise, the chapter, and exercise too. So it's more fun, because I have another person for talking about and discussing, and I think it's the most wonderful when you have some doubts or knowledge for share for people, and put your thoughts for another word to criticize you or say something different for your visions. Yes, it's very helpful and important for as a community, as person, and so on.
So we actually
amazing.
do one scholarship student per class that we do. And our last one was from Brazil, right? So I was to give the keynote if the conference happened in May. Sorry that this didn't happen. I was learning Portuguese I'm still learning it. I still do my Duolingo every day, but Adolfo joined us for the class, and I'm sure I will have another Brazilian student soon.
Yes, I talked to with him. Man, wow, it's amazing. I need to about your thoughts about your about the course, because I would like to sign as two because it's a huge investment for Brazilian folks,
Yes. And so that's why we're doing so basically with the pandemic, we're already half price. And that's why we're doing the scholarship program. And you're on our list. Don't worry. Don't worry.
That's a great thing to
Yes,
do, man. Seriously.
Hey, it's great. So Adolfo was a great man. And I've been teaching a Kenyan group earlier today. And, they are such brilliant developers. I have no idea why everybody isn't going there for their project work. No language barrier, just plus 7 hours instead of plus 11, or 10 and a half for India. It's man, they are amazing. They're fantastic. And as you can see right here, there's some rising Brazilian talent as well. There's great Elixir talent around the world.
That is a fact. I
Any
don't
more
want to
questions? Did I get them all?
rush anything, but yeah, I was gonna say, are there more questions?
No, but I say something related about the cost and about this thing we pass around the road about the coronavirus, and think you need to put your money for what kind of the thing you would like to invest your money, not only food or course and study and so on and something like that. I really like to invest my money in Groxio instead I don't know, Erlang Foundation, because they has basically the same course for Groxio. And I think it's more investment for community. I invest in some person different the organization because they has more money instead of a person.
Yeah. So I don't know. I agree with that. I think that we decide the world that we want to live in, right? And so about 6 years ago, I decided to. I was at a conference, and there were 403 people. 400 were white guys. 400 out of 403 white guys, and that was really disturbing for me. And so I started laying the groundwork to start this learning company. And our goal is to spend about half our time, serving underrepresented in technology. And right now, I'm up to about a quarter of my time, but I'd like to get that number higher. And I know that I have some work to do. We've talked about pricing, world pricing. We're working on that. But with one developer that's building the printing press and writing the books for the printing press, it's a little difficult. So, but thank you so much for your words of encouragement and your support. It's very much who we aspire to be. We want to make better developers. And we believe that learning multiple languages is the best way to get there.
Cool. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, I just want to say, Bruce, thank you so much. This was super enlightening. It was good to come back and LiveView. When I first saw it, I was like, whoa! And then I said, okay. I played around with it, did my little project, and then kind of like let it simmer in the background just to see where
Yeah.
you have to, right? Like you have to like lay a
You
few
do.
seeds, and then you have to like see what happens over the next like 8, 10 months or whatever, right? So this was super cool. Ryan and I think Jacob took off, but thank you as always for setting the meeting up and everything. And Norio, thanks for being here. I think this was great. Bruce, next year I would love to have. Hopefully we can have the event in person, and I would love. I think that I was talking to Norio about it, and I think that like your philosophy and everything with kind of learning, it's just really a kind of life of kind of like learning, continuous learning, right, is huge, and it's right on point with why we developed Detroit Tech Watch in the first place. So
I agree.
I just think it's a real good fit. And I've been checking out Groxio, and I may, it might be something, even though I've done a lot of Elixir stuff already. I see that you have like Pony on there, and Crystal's another one that's interesting. We had to talk about Crystal last year. We had to talk about Pony last year. And so yeah, it's cool to see what you guys are doing over there, and I really, really, really love the underrepresented that they really focusing on making sure that underrepresented groups are getting the learning too. So I think that's just fantastic, because Honorio and I have talked about this too. It's like, even with our events, it's like we don't want a whole bunch of white guys there, like, and so trying to break through that barrier is
apparently
a big
you're doing
challenge.
something right. I mean, look at the list. It's it looks it's a great group. Thank you, and I agree. And Tech Watch is an amazing event. If you ever get a chance to go in person, go in person. It's a great event.
Awesome.
Love to have it in person.
Yes, I know. It's definitely unfortunate, but I feel like we're going to get through this. It's going to take some time, as we've all kind of figured out, and we'll navigate the waters together. But I really appreciate the fact that we can have these remote events. It's great to see everybody's smiling faces, and it's just I just feel very, very fortunate to be able to continue these events every month. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and have a wonderful month, and
hosting us.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks again. Yep.